report from a British think tank accuses Ireland of freeloading on other countries' capabilities. Joining me in studio to talk about this is security analyst Declan and Cathal, independent TD and former Army Ranger. Good morning and welcome to you both. I might take something you said, Cathal, as a paraphrase of the think tank. You said, Ireland is like a guy who goes to the pub with his friends and never buys a round when it's his turn. Worse still, Ireland is like the guy who the very next morning mocks his friends for supporting the drinks industry. That's how Ireland is conducting its affairs internationally. So you're at one with the think tank.
Yeah, 100% true. I've read the report. It's only about 70 odd pages. It's freely available on the internet. And all it's doing really is echoing the concerns that the likes of Declan and myself have been saying for the last 4 or 5 years, obviously with a very British slant to it, which is understanding because it's based in London. You know?
Yeah, but you point out that there were both Labour Party and Conservative interests involved in this. So it should not be viewed maybe as a right-wing or a unionist type report, or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Most countries would regard national security as above politics because it's an existential issue, and it shouldn't be a tribal political point of view. National security is absolutely essential, and we should be viewing it from the same prism here in Ireland as well. National security should be above politics.
So we are freeloaders.
Yeah, very much so. That's the phrase we actually coined ourselves about 2 or 3 years ago. And the British, to their credit, are just echoing what we've already said and perhaps even amplifying it a bit more.
Declan, are we freeloaders?
Well, it depends on which way you look at it. From a kinetic defence point of view, we absolutely are, because we don't take our air defence or our above surface or below surface nautical defences seriously. We've depleted our regular army to the extent that it's barely able to complete its duties as prescribed at the moment. So from that perspective, we're not shouldering our weight in that regard. We're a chink in Europe's defence. However, one of the things that I find interesting about the report, like I'd agree with practically everything Cathal said there. The report does articulate a lot of important points about the lack of kinetic defence in Ireland. However, I think the climax of the report is really something that is from a unionist perspective. The desire to want to see bases. You know, it's encouraging the British government.
Well, it says that the border with the Republic, which is not capable of defending itself, is therefore the weak link into the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and I don't entirely agree with that. And actually, a lot of British securocrats don't believe it either. The British would rather, they long ago made a political and strategic decision that it was in their interest not to have bases of significant nature in Northern Ireland in order not to upset the delicate political rapprochement.
It was, in fact, Margaret Thatcher, as I recall, who actually said that Britain had no long-term strategic interest in Northern Ireland.
That's right, and then that was echoed infamously by Peter Brooks, and was Peter Brook on the Late Late Show. So the British have been managing the defence posture from the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, and they're able to project force there. And they do so with our acquiescence because they use our airspace at times through the agreement that has been in place since the 1950s.
But isn't there something else going on which is not in this particular report, but in the reporting of poll numbers last week, which suggested that England, Scotland and Wales don't want Northern Ireland anyway. So, if you ally that with this report, you have two contradictory things. But really it's saying, if you analyse the two together, basically the island of Britain can defend itself.
But you see,
if it's called upon to defend Northern Ireland, there may be a weakness.
But you see, in a way, I always argue that's the motivation for that report, is to try and make Northern Ireland relevant to being maintained as a part of the United Kingdom. It's a clever idea, and it's something that dates back to World War II. Having said that, though, there are broader aspects to look at from our perspective here on this side of the border and in this side of the Irish Sea, which is it points out glaring gaps. It does so in a sort of an imperious manner, but there are some positive things to be aware of too. The British are much more concerned about our cooperation with them at an intelligence level, at a cyber security level, and we do have extensive links there. The securocrats would be aware that when it comes to projection of kinetic power, they don't really need us to be involved in that. However, that's a deficit from us, and this is something that I think Cathal would agree with. we're not at the table when decisions are going to be made of that nature that are going to influence courses of action for us and that will affect our assets, be they undersea, be they above surface, be they in the air. And
So
we
in
should
other
be
words,
at the table.
all of these undersea fibre optic cables linking the EU, i.e. the Republic of Ireland, with the United States of America, that if we're not worried about them, other people are.
Absolutely. We've taken one
And
small...
they're taking those steps.
Totally. Well, they will. The US and the NATO nations, UK included, we took one small, sensible, responsible step, joining the NATO-led individual tailored partnership program, which allows us to share knowledge and intelligence about that. But I think Cathal would agree that's something we need to step up on, because this is of serious relevance to our.
So you're not
economic
suggesting we need our own submarines, for example, but I mean,
well, we wouldn't be able to afford them. We
but
need
a lot
to
of stuff
cooperate.
that you do in business, you subcontract out and you pay your share. So other people do the job for you, whether it's cleaning the toilets or whatever it might be doing, you use a subcontractor. I mean, should we be subcontracting and paying our way so we'd have a say when those decisions are being made? Cathal?
Well, we don't need submarines, but we certainly do need sonar. So we're the only country in Europe that has a navy with no sonar, an air force with no primary radar, and our military army contingent in Syria is being withdrawn in the next fortnight because we can't afford to man the situation out there anymore. So I mean, that just shows how bad things are. And it's not just the UK being concerned about their Western approaches as they would regard it. France is equally concerned about this strategic blind spot, which is Ireland. And you'll see if you're tracking the flight radars or the maritime radars on open source, you can see a lot more French assets and British assets in the Atlantic looking after Ireland's territorial waters and our EEZ, which we're not prepared to do ourselves.
Aren't they doing that in their own interest? They're not doing it to mind little old Ireland.
Very much so. So if I could just use another analogy, say for example a block of apartments with 28 apartments in them, obviously the 27 EU countries plus the UK. Ireland is a ground floor apartment who consistently leaves their windows open. And if anybody burgles the Irish apartment, they have very easy access to the rest of the apartment blocks in the first floor or the second floor. So Ireland isn't putting its weight, but we're taking full advantage of the shield that NATO and in particular our nearest neighbour are providing, but at the same time lecturing them on how amoral they are for having an armed forces in the first place. You know?
Another quote from an interview you gave: "We spent 1.25 billion on defence. When our citizens get in trouble abroad, we're the first to ring a NATO country and ask for help. In fairness, those countries do normally help us, but the following week we're telling the same countries how evil they are for being in NATO."
Precisely, and that is really starting to degrade. Particularly the diplomatic community here in Dublin are lovely. They're really, really courteous and very, very hospitable, but they're bewildered by the Irish approach. Our Taoiseach and our Taoiseach went over to Munich a couple of weeks ago for the first time ever. Both of them were there. They were pretty much laughed off the stage. They were trying to lecture other countries about humanitarian aid is the way we should do defence, international relations. And they were kind of saying, well, you're going to give biscuits to the Ukrainians so they can throw them at the Russian tanks? I mean, it's incredible. Now, humanitarian aid is really important as part of a holistic approach, but when you're dealing with hard defence and trying to stop Russian armour...
This whole thing of our neutrality and what that actually means, what it does effectively mean that we can't give arms to Ukraine, however... We can send people to train them in mine clearance,
and we can give fuel and we can give other things that are essential to the war effort. It's a redundant and morally inept policy, and it's there because the Green Party are militarily illiterate and they had it inserted in the programme for government. Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael wouldn't have gone along with that nonsense by themselves, I'm sure. And it's something that we need to wake up to because, as Cathal has said, it makes us look inept and incompetent and morally redundant on the international stage.
So what is the way forward from both of your viewpoints? I mean, is it that we build up a ground army that is capable of defending the island from incursion, however unlikely that might be? Russia has a long number of countries to get through before they hit this island.
Well, I would say, first of all, go back to where we were 15 years ago would be a good start. We had 10,500 people in the Defence Forces.
How many do you have now?
7.5, so it's a 30% headcount reduction. So if you reduce the amount of nurses or doctors or teachers in the country by 30% over a 15-year period, you can imagine how much difference that would
we
cause.
did have army patrols protecting bank vans, for example. You know, that task is properly redundant. So we were doing things then that we may not need to do now. Yeah. And in fact, in the report about the development of the armed forces, they say you got to look at that aid to the civil power and see which is appropriate for the army to be involved in and which is not.
Well, Pat, we have an obsession in this country when we talk about the army as if its primary role is an internal security one. That's not its primary role. That's an aid to the civil power role. The Garda have the primary role there. But our defence forces have been a central element of what we call our values-based foreign policy. That's about deploying troops overseas in pursuit of humanitarian values. Now, the humanitarian values that Cathal talked about, they're an important part of our system. But it's not purely done by humanitarians. And what humanitarians look for are to countries like Ireland that have a professional military that can secure the humanitarian space, that allow the humanitarians do what they need to do. They don't want soldiers trying to be humanitarians. They want soldiers to protect that space.
They want soldiers to be soldiers.
They do. And for that to happen, you need a proper, professional, competent military. We're eroding the proper, professional, competent military that we developed that acquitted themselves with professionalism and honour in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Chad, in Lebanon, in the Congo, etc., etc.
And it's the
And
job...
we're undermining our own foreign policy
But it's the job
values.
of the military to put themselves in harm's way, Cathal. Isn't that the reality? And anyone who is faint-hearted has no place in the military.
Absolutely. And having a robust military is a completely different question from whether you decide to be a neutral country or not. Neutrality is a completely legitimate defence strategy if you choose to resource it properly. They're completely different questions. But to go back to your original question, where do we go from here, Pat? I would say go back to where we were 15 years ago, number one. Secondly, implement the findings of the Commission of the Defence Forces. So a level of ambition, number three, absolutely has to be implemented. And thirdly, we could certainly do with a standalone defence minister, just like every other EU country, bar Malta.
You have pointed out that we have two education ministers. Well, Simon Harris, will he replace someone in his outgoing role or will he not? But there's him and there's Norma Foley. And yet the brief of defence is a shared one.
Yeah, so we have two finance ministers, two education ministers, no standalone defence minister. But not only that, we don't even have a junior defence minister. So if I could use my last analogy of the morning, Pat, really. So Ireland is like an aircraft flying at 33,000 feet with not only no captain in the cockpit, but not even a co-pilot in the cockpit. We have nobody in the flight deck. And we're going through a very turbulent period. And as a result, we're very, very vulnerable and very, very exposed.
Now, recruiting seems to be a difficult problem, Declan. And I'm wondering if it's if you like, the lack of excitement. Now, they've got a very good TV ad for the Navy at the moment. And it looks like an exciting life. And yet the reality is we've got one ship out at sea at any given time. We can't crew. We've ambitions to have 9 ships eventually within maybe a decade or so with double crewing. So most of them are out at sea most of the time. But there's got to be something in it for the young people to say, yeah, I want to be in this army because I want to do these things. I want to become an expert maybe in cybersecurity. I want to know my weapons. I want to see different parts of the world in a peacekeeping role. There's got to be a bit of a buzz.
Absolutely. But all those things are possible if the powers that be within the government and the department offer young people a career with some stability. At the moment, I would say probably the biggest problem that faces a lot of young people is longevity of their career, because enlistment contracts are shorter than they used to be, and that you could be find yourself out of a job if you don't get the right courses and training under your belt through no fault of your own. Now, that's easily enough dealt with. There are plenty of young people out there that would make excellent soldiers of all ranks if they see that pathway is clear. I think also we need to appeal to people who will embrace the infantry ethos of hardship. The Defence Forces offers a career that is for those who want challenge, physical, psychological, who want to serve overseas, who want to go in harm's way. It offers great yield and benefit in terms of training and education. You do not have to serve in some giant military like the US or indeed the UK. The Irish Defence Forces equipped me with a suite of skills and options in education, including university education, that has allowed me participate in a variety of work all over the world.
Okay, now, you want to enlarge the standing army and obviously the Navy and the Air Corps, the Air Service, whatever it may become in time. But how much money do we spend? I mean, how much capital do we need to invest in aircraft, in the kind of backup technology, the radar at sea, the sonar and all of that? And we also have to provide opportunities for these, if you like, overseas adventures to keep our soldiers, be they men and women or women, busy.
Well, also to keep Ireland viable in its foreign policy objectives. Sorry.
Yeah. So basically, the current budget for 2024 is 1.25 billion. 80% of that is on salaries and pensions. So there's very little from a capability point of view. Now, I'd agree very much with Minister Simon Coveney. He said a number of times that it should be at 2 billion by the year 2028. So we only have a 4-year opportunity to get to €2 billion now. Unfortunately, the defence budget was only increased by 20 million this year, which is peanuts. So we have press releases saying that this is the largest investment in the history of the state in our defence forces, but there's no evidence for that whatsoever. So we need to upper game from that point of view.